Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
It's been a long-standing knock on the Democratic Party. Its national candidates might win more votes, but its state and local officials fall short in races that matter for everything from abortion access to certifying elections. New platforms like Oath and the States Project, which are backed by venture capitalists, are trying to change that by using a Moneyball-style approach to political giving. That is what Bloomberg News wealth team reporter Amanda Gordon calls it in her new Bloomberg News piece. She joins us in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, and also joining us is Derrick, co-founder of Oath, on Zoom in New York City. So I'm going to start with you, Amanda. What is a Moneyball-style approach to political giving?
Well, it's looking where you can have the most impact based on looking at hundreds, thousands of data points. And that has to do with everything from which races could tip the majority in a state legislature to where the money will be best spent because the candidate is still underfunded. So when you go on to Oath with an impact score that they have for every candidate that they feature, you can see how much of their optimal funding they've reached. But that score itself is based on Oath's assessment and algorithms.
Okay, well, that's a perfect time for Derrick to come in, co-founder of Oath. Talk to us about these scores, the algorithm. Where do you get the data that you use to present to folks?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. Most of our team are engineers and data analysts. Many do not come from the political space, although some of them do. And we are pulling in data from every available public source, things like expert forecasts, as well as public polling. And then we supplement that with data that we purchase, as well as our own internal analysis as far as how expensive each of these races is likely to be, how competitive the candidates really are based on the data that we have access to, looking at things like voter registration, past performance in the district, and so on and so forth.
So, Amanda, what took the Democrats so long? Because you write that major GOP donors have focused on these down-ballot races for years now.
Well, this is not a brand new effort of Democrats. There are many groups that are making an effort to do this. But I think that the value was under-recognized, that a lot of power rests on the local level. And that was not really apparent until the Republican-controlled legislatures, until Republican-loaded school boards started making choices that brought alarm to Democrats.
So where are you actually seeing the money need to go right now, Brian? Like, what is the platform showing you? And then do the scores change based on if people give, if these candidates raise money?
Yes, the scores are updated in real time, including the donations that are actually moving on the Oath platform. So the more that if a candidate has a $10,000 gap that we've identified, if donors come on to the platform and give $10,000 in that race, the score will change to reflect that. We see currently the greatest funding gaps in down-ballot races for things like state Supreme Court seats, which often go pretty under the radar, as well as key state legislative seats that just the sheer amount of research that an individual donor has to do to figure out which race to fund is really cumbersome for most people. And so unless you have a tool like Oath, it's really hard to find where your dollars can actually have meaningful impact. So in state legislative races and courts especially.
Okay, that's helpful. Amanda, I want to send it over to you because you typically write about people who have a lot of money. That's your beat on the wealth team. Brian aims for the normal person. But I'm wondering if you're seeing the wealthiest donors out there use this type of data in order to decide where to deploy their money.
Well, that's what struck me about this area of encouraging political donations, because I've seen it in philanthropy. So, for example, to throw back to something I was on radio a few years talking about, early childhood education was seen as an investment where you could have the greatest impact influencing a child's success academically if you go in and provide support when they're 2 or 3 years old. So here also we're seeing an intervention that can have really outsized impact. And what's interesting about what's happening with Oath and the States Project is that they're very committed to that grassroots donor and giving them a way to make a difference with their small dollars, but they're also seeing interest in a higher level donor. And at Oath, that's a fast growing segment where they give a little bit more hands-on advising.
Brian, what is traffic looking like on the Oath platform right now? Did it pick up after Kamala Harris entered the race? Do you expect it to pick up even more, I guess, in these next 2 weeks?
It has been up and to the right pretty consistently over the last few months, but we did see a huge jump in traffic after Vice President Harris announced her campaign, as well as when there are major headlines driving either fear about what Trump administration could look like or could mean for someone, or law coming out of a state legislature. Those types of events also precipitate higher traffic days for us, where people can really easily turn that motivation or that anxiety into a strategic action on the platform.
Brian, your focus is on Democrats. Who's better at this in general, though? Are Republicans better than Democrats at this?
I think that currently Democrats have a more challenging environment and a larger coordination problem, because there's just more grassroots donors on the Democratic side, and a larger percent of campaigns are funded by those grassroots donations, which just creates an information challenge. And that's the information challenge that Oath is trying to address. I think that there has been longer term coordination right of center, as Amanda already alluded to, that they've been investing in these down ballot seats for decades. And so there is a bit of catch up that we're trying to play, but I think that a technology like Oath could shorten the amount of time that it would be required to catch up.
That's Brian Derrick joining us from New York City. He's co-founder of Oath. He joins us remotely here in our studio. We have Bloomberg News Wealth Team Amanda Gordon joining us in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Check out her story. It's on the Bloomberg terminal. Democratic donors deploy, quote, Moneyball strategy to tip local races. She talks about platforms like Oath, the States Project, doling out cash. GOP donors have focused on down ballot races for years. Democrats, as Brian said, getting caught up now.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Businessweek. That's Emily Graffeo in for Carol Massar. I'm Tim Stenovec. Emily, how are you doing it? It's a little personal question, but you know, planning for the future, retirement.
Well, it's,
how you feeling about it?
It's coming up in a few years, Tim.
What are you thinking?
You know, I have my fixed income ready to go, and
I hope not.
No, it'll be a long time.
Yeah.
I think I'm in the Vanguard 26.
Is it on your mind at all?
Ridiculous year. Well, it is. I do. During the pandemic, I feel like when we all had time to kind of slow down and think a little bit about retirement, because no one, I wasn't spending any money, I did get really into personal finance YouTube.
Perfect.
So
I think a lot of people did.
Yes, this is a passion of mine.
Okay, that's good.
Saving. I love saving money.
You know, the advantage that young people have is that they're young and they have years to plan.
Right.
And we know
so
what
they
happens
can
to markets in the long run.
Put all of their money in Bitcoin and just wait for 40 years.
No financial advice from Emily Graffeo.
Yes, that was a joke.
The reason I'm asking you about this is because John Hancock Retirement is out with their 10th annual financial stress survey. We've got with us Wayne Park, the CEO of John Hancock Retirement. He joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. What I love about this survey is that you have a benchmark of 9 previous years to look at with the 10th annual survey. What sticks out to you this year? What's different about this year?
I think for this year, thanks for having me first. Because of the benchmark, we've been watching it over the 10 years, but this is the first year we probably broke it down by generation segments like millennials and Gen Z and Gen X like myself and boomers, and the results are different. Is probably not as surprising, but really interesting to look at.
Are you Gen Z?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is great. We got Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, like all represented right here. How's Gen Z doing?
Gen Z and millennials, actually, we had to combine together. Believe it or not, millennials, age 42, the oldest segment. But they're struggling. Actually, when they look at their outlooks, they feel like about 50% actually of all respondents said they don't feel like they're on track for their retirement, which is a big number.
Why is this Why does this happen in the U.S.? Is this because we moved away from a pension model and because the onus is on us? Is it because life has gotten so expensive that if you don't have money for rent or buying a home, you're not going to have money to sock away for later?
I think it's for two main reasons. One, I think the pension move away, that's been happening for a long time. So probably most millennials and Gen Zs for sure, they don't recall a pension and don't have an expectation to have one. I think the recency bias is on inflation, right? Everything just costs more. And the debt burden that most millennials and Gen Zs are probably feeling about their student debt is certainly a piece. But the other reason they feel probably down, which is kind of ironic, is the fact that it's good news. People are living longer, right? The life expectancy is closer to 80 now. So I think the recognition that, wow, I'm going to live longer, which means retirement is for decades, not any just few years anymore. So combination of good news, great, I'm going to live longer, but that means I have to fund that longer. And oh, by the way, it's costing me a lot, so I can't actually fund that in the short term.
What does the survey tell us about, how people are feeling and how that compares with their reality? Because I do feel like we talk a lot about, Bloomberg, about how sometimes how people feel about the economy is not actually the reality of like how healthy the economy is.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really true. So that's a good call out. What we see is how they're feeling about the economy and just retirement readiness overall is also different by generation. So Gen X, actually the worst feeling, probably because they're in the sandwich generation, right? They have to fund their own retirement, their kids' college. They might still have their own student debt still to pay for, maybe a mortgage. So they're probably in the worst category. But if you're a boomer, not to say anything, but they're closer. They see the realities, and if they're in a position where they're hitting their retirement target age, they're actually pretty confident. The other side of living longer for boomers is now they have to think about their healthcare cost a little bit longer. So a lot of concern more on healthcare and kind of life aspects. The other interesting that came out of this research is that while people recognize they have to work longer, right? That's kind of, hey, I'm living longer. I probably have to work longer to fund that retirement. When we survey the people that are out of the workplace, 60% of them said they retired before they wanted to or they thought they would.
Why do people do that?
It probably wasn't their choice, right? So it could be for health reasons, employment ended, right? So depending on where they were in the economy. Which is a
euphemism for getting laid off or fired.
Or maybe they went through the gig route. There could be a lot of reasons where you go to a different mode where you're actually not earning the amount of income, nor do you have access to a retirement plan.
Where does Social Security come into this?
We largely look at Social Security as a really important, one of the three legs of the stool, right? 3-leg Social Security. Typically for U.S., it's an employer-sponsored retirement plan, 401ks or other forms. And then there is a place for personal savings. So Social Security, of course, there's concerns. Is it going to last? So when you look at the longer life that we're all going to have, which is great. But then on the other end, I don't want to bring new facts in, but the birth rate in the U.S. is also going down, right?
So that's an issue for Social Security.
Exactly. That's why I'm bringing it up, because Social Security is not funded, right? It's based on the income levels and the taxation that of future taxpayers. So that's probably a more longer tail to kind of play out, but based on this study, I will say the green shoot is because we've been doing it year over year, this may not, I don't want to call it a retirement crisis, but there's definitely a check engine light on. But the light is little less red, meaning compared to last year, people are feeling less worse. I don't know if that's better, but certainly I think the inflation subsiding is certainly playing through in the responses that we're seeing.
We started the conversation talking about Gen Z and personal finance when it comes to younger people. Half of workers report being behind in their retirement saving. Only 1 in 3 feel like they are on track. What can people who are early on in their path towards planning retirement do, in these years to get ready so that they don't feel like that when they're trying to retire?
Yeah, I thought you gave it away at the very beginning, right? So for the younger folks, they have the best asset possible, which is time. So for the younger generations, get your budget planning in order, get your cash flow in order so that you can use that time in your favor and power of compounding, right? So save now, over time, you gave it away. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can share from my own personal experience. Like I started my 401k in 2006. So what happened in, the great financial crisis? Everything crashed. You keep putting money in each and every year, whatever you can put in, and the compounding effect is pretty remarkable. I mean, I wish I could go back in time and put more money in because time is sort of the best thing we have.
That's what we hear from retirees that ended up retiring earlier than possible. And then the rule of thumb, right, regular historic equity market returns is that your money will double every 7 years. Wow. So people don't, if you put it in those terms, keep socking it away and it'll grow bigger than probably you would ever expected.
Wayne, good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. Wayne Park is John Hancock Retirement CEO. He joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. No question, it's a polarizing time out there in the U.S. Just look no further than the polls. Even people who disagree with one another historically, it seemed like could have more civil conversations. Maybe I'm just longing for the past, Emily, but it certainly seems things are more polarized now than
good anecdotal evidence.
Yes.
Absolutely. Even from just 10 years ago.
There's been some Pew Research out there too that kind of supports this also. What about when you get to the workplace? There's a lot of questions about whether or not you should talk about politics at the workplace. You should bring your whole self to work, which includes, everything. Gabriella Kellerman is Chief Innovation Officer over at BetterUp. It's a coaching platform that looks to help people boost their performance at work. So it's something she thinks about a lot in terms of, okay, who should we be when we're at work? She joins us from Berkeley, California. What do you think, Gabriella? Is work the right place to talk about politics?
Well, it's great to be with you guys today, and I'm glad you're shining a light on this because, of course, dealing with increasing polarization at work is one of the many challenges that makes this modern, very unusual world of work so difficult for all of us facing disruption and uncertainty, and now add into the mix the stresses of leading teams that include people with exactly opposite political views. So our job is to help those folks be successful and to help their companies succeed and stay focused despite the polarization. That's what we've been studying since the spring, both in our historical data set with hundreds of thousands of employees and leaders around the globe, and also with the new prospective data set. We're watching in real time as that political tension mounts to see how it's affecting people and also to understand what we can do about it.
So BetterUp recently has put out some research about the impacts and potential solutions to political divisiveness in the workplace. Tell us about some of the most significant findings from this research.
Great. So the first and most significant finding is that there really is a cost to this. So this is not just uncomfortable, it is also expensive. We found significant productivity and well-being declines in advance of elections and peaking the week of election, both in 2020 here in the US and in 2022. And we see that same thing happening and recurring month by month today as well. We have calculated based on those percentage decreases and mapping it into Bureau of Labor statistics on the impact and the cost of that. It's about $900,000 per week of distraction per 10,000 employees.
Wow.
So for some of our largest customers, hundreds of thousands, millions of employees, you start to get into the tens, if not hundreds of millions of cost and distraction over the course of a single election season.
This is just election distraction?
Election distraction.
What about just like people at work on their phones looking at Instagram or something, not related to the election?
Well, exactly. And elections are just one example of political polarization, right? This is the year of the election, so the US elections, of course, but there's elections around the globe distracting different geographies. And then, of course, all kinds of geopolitical events that threaten to pull us apart. It's quite expensive, and it's an ongoing and evergreen challenge in a way, even though we think of these as spikes. The spikes are spiking higher and they're coming closer and closer together.
And yet one of the other findings, I'm looking at the notes that you sent over, is that banning workplace political discussions raises team conflict by 35% and self-censorship by 23%, negatively impacting performance. So how are companies supposed to balance this? They don't want to completely, I guess, ban the discussion, but they also don't want their employees distracted. What is the solution here?
Right, that's right. And there are companies that have taken the stand of we just don't want people to talk about this at work. And we do see negative impacts to that. A huge part of what enables us to do well at work has to do with a feeling of autonomy, of agency. We want to feel respected as, grown, mature adults who can make decisions in our best interest about what we do and don't talk about at work. I will tell you that the number one factor we see in terms of determining the variance in stress that an individual employee experiences around political tension is actually their direct manager. So it's the manager that matters most in our data. It's how your manager is showing up. Is your manager mouthing off with politically charged comments? That's going to increase stress dramatically. Is your manager open to listening and expressing empathy for your experience as a human being, regardless of whether you agree with them on the political front? That will help alleviate tension. So we see that yet again, so much of what determines our well-being, our productivity in the workplace is actually that frontline manager.
Dr. Kellerman, can you talk to us a little bit about how to take this approach to our personal lives, maybe ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday? Yes, I'm thinking about that already, but I imagine a lot of people are going to, be in situations where this stuff might come up, and it can divide people. It can divide families. What's the right approach?
Yeah. So when we get into sort of the dramatic triangle of us versus them and this dehumanization of the other side, there's really not going to be a winner there. We have to kind of rise above that and get into more of a connected coaching mentality, which is where we're listening for what this person's experience is like. We're listening to be empathetic to them. We're looking for common ground. So one way out of the us-them dynamic is find a new categorization within which we're all the us, right? If it's Thanksgiving, we're all family. We care about the ones around the table. We care about folks who are getting older. We care about the young ones coming up. What are the topics we can find where we are genuinely emotionally connected to one another and genuinely feel like we are an us?
Dr. Kellerman, what about how offices, I want to go back to the workplace and then maybe we'll pivot back to Thanksgiving.
Yeah, go for it.
Or Halloween conversations. Go through all the holidays. But I'm also looking through the just some of these other findings. Most employees want their organizations to stay politically neutral. I'm struggling to even think of what that would look like. What does an office, I guess a manager who's both respectful, but also, how can they demonstrate that they are remaining politically neutral?
Yeah, so let me give a little context on that finding. We looked at a lot of different factors that determine an individual's level of stress, and we found that the manager behaviors matter significantly. We also just asked employees, what do you want and not want your workplace to do that in the midst of these spikes in political tension, and what do you think would help? So these are employee preferences. They're one piece of the picture. Every organization is different. Every culture is different. Every CEO is different, as we've seen all over the news in the last few weeks. So you have to put all those pieces together. But coming through loud and clear in our survey on the employee preference, 70% of employees do not want their organizations to be taking a stand on the election. They want their organization to remain neutral. And that means really external facing. And again, employee preference. There's about 7% of employees who do want their organization to take a side. And then everyone else is sort of neutral. So you have what seems like a majority of employees that are expressing a desire for a boundary, and then other employees who are expressing, a different kind of a desire for a boundary, and how we manage, how we respond to all of those populations when we make a decision that's either going to disappoint the 7% or the 70%. How we manage through that matters, and it's an opportunity to then model some of those behaviors we're asking of managers. So again, on the manager side, things like listening, asking careful questions, being good at problem solving, which is an important skill that helps us navigate conflict. Those things help, they alleviate the tension. What hurts is any kind of acts of intimidation of the people on your team around these topics, politically charged comments. So there's ways of talking about the fact that you might have a lot at stake personally in the election, or you might be feeling stressed and tense about the election without making it an environment where it seems like your politics as the manager are the only way to go.
Does this stress end after the election? Does it end in 2 weeks?
Great question. No, as you might expect, it takes us a little while to recover. So based on historical elections, we see about a 6-month arc of decrease in well-being and productivity. And at the 3 months is where that election is. So about 3 months of buildup that we're watching in real time, and then about 3 months of recovery.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I can't help but think about how, we started this discussion talking about how it seems like the world is more politically charged conversations. How does social media, I guess, play into all of this? Is the reason why people feel like they're so on edge and they can't talk about these issues because people are constantly online and reading things online, and it's hard to then take the conversation into the workplace or, at family dinner?
Yeah, so I would say the research community is divided on this one. There's certainly a lot of evidence that social media can worsen things. There's evidence that there are other cultural generational factors in play. There's a host of explanations out there. Importantly, we do see political polarization increasing around the world. So this is a global phenomenon. It just happens to be particularly pronounced in the United States. One of the other theories that I think is worth paying attention to is social media. Byproduct of it is we spend less time in real life, IRL, with real people, having real conversations. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote about talking to strangers and the ways that just being willing to engage and have a conversation with people we don't know as well is part of what keeps us out of a tribal mentality and in a more open-minded approach to our society and our civilization. So getting out, talking to each other, spending more time in real conversation, being curious about
the old-fashioned stuff. Yeah, that 25% social disconnection of the workforce who felt distant from coworkers sticks out to me in your survey. Dr. Gabriella Kellerman, the Chief Innovation Officer over at BetterUp, joining us from Berkeley. This is Bloomberg.